Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, 𝗘𝗀𝗃𝗓, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, 𝗘𝗀𝗃𝗓.
Welcome in, 𝗘𝗀𝗃𝗓 with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you again for those that are tuning into the show. Continue to follow the show. I appreciate it very much. I would say that I'm trying to keep my promise and doing at least one podcast a week and hopefully working up to a second one or so. It's hard to believe that several years ago I was doing three to five a week, and then this pandemic hit and things got kind of crazy and busy, and we lost the studio and all these interesting things. But thanks to technology, we don't need the studio. It's kind of sad. I kind of like the studio. I miss the studio. Maybe we'll have it back one of these days. So,
well, you didn't lose it. You just put it in mothballs, right?
Yeah, it's collecting
there.
It's collecting
Right?
cobwebs. That's right. So before we get started, we got our good friend Jack Russo with us today. We have a fun, great topic, and we're going to be talking about the best cities to retire, and actually the friendliest cities, which is pretty interesting. We're going to chat about that. Before we do that, just a reminder, the show is sponsored by Bundle Select. Bundle Select partners with corporations throughout the United States that offers employees an online platform to bundle all their real estate services for discounted services across the board. See why over 30 million employees now have signed up for Bundle Select. If you are an employee and interested about this, go to bundleselect.com, tell your HR or benefits people. And or if you are a benefits or HR person listening to this podcast, just go to bundleselect.com and find out why. It's exciting stuff. We're really changing the way people transaction with the real estate. A lot of stuff's going on right now. So check that out. Again, bundleselect.com. All right. Over 10,000 people, again, continue to download the podcast. We appreciate that. We're going to continue to have more shows, and excited today again to invite my good friend Jack Russo in. We're going to be talking about the best cities to retire as well as the friendliest cities. But before that, we'll get an update from Florida, and the state of Florida. Jack, not to start this with a political spin, but is DeSantis still the crowned king, or is he starting to lose some luster? What's going on over there?
I think when you compare the Sunshine State, which is Florida, with the Sunshine whatever California is. What is California?
We're the Golden Bear State, or Golden State, or so, right?
State?
Something like that. Yeah.
I mean, they both offer great beaches. They both have a lot of sunshine. They both have their own very different politics. But I think DeSantis is doing far better than Gavin Newsom. You got a recall election that's about to occur, and everything I read says it's going to be really close.
Yep.
And that could really change things in amazing ways for California, depending on how it plays out. But generally speaking, I think people think DeSantis is going to run for president and may even run as quickly as 2024. Because, if you look at sort of the lineup in the Republican Party, and he's sort of one of the favorites, there aren't a lot of people that have, accomplished as much as he's accomplished in a state that's as diverse. I mean, I have to say, I see more people of color here in Florida than I see in California.
Really? No kidding.
Than I see in Northern California. And it's far more, if you ask me, it's far more integrated than what I see in Northern California. But maybe people will say, oh, you're just not looking carefully enough. But in general, I would say that there's definitely a big inbound number of folks coming to Florida because of three things that sort of tie to the topic, which is one, it's very tax efficient or tax beneficial.
Friendly. Yeah.
Tax friendly, which is what people look for in their older age. They really don't want to pay high taxes because they're typically on fixed incomes. Second thing is it really is a great climate. It does get hot. There is some humidity, but generally speaking, the sun is out every day and it's warm. So older people tend to try to not go anywhere where it gets cold. And I have to tell you, in Northern California, particularly San Francisco, it gets cold. It sometimes is cold even in August in San Francisco with some of the fog that rolls in, and people are like shocked. It's August and it's like 40 something degrees. Really? I mean, here in Florida, it's typically in the 80s and 90s. And then the third thing, so climate's a big part of it. The tax benefits are a big part of it. The third thing is, I think everything is just a lot cheaper. So you can buy, I've said this before, you can buy a house here for $1 million or so that it would easily cost 10 million in California. Like there's a 10x ratio of value, and the value is really there. I mean, it's not the construction.
I think, no, Jack, I think more importantly, you said this before, which I think should hit home for more people. I think, and you mentioned this, so let me know if it's still true. More importantly, you could go there and get a house for 150, 200,000 in a nice, decent area, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's the major difference, I would say.
Right. It's a big, and there are jobs, but they're not in the nature of Silicon Valley jobs. Sure. I mean, the big difference is Silicon Valley has a knowledge economy. There's a lot of software. There's a lot of IT. There's a lot of intellectual property. There's a lot of innovation. Florida is still a very traditional state. It's still got a lot of farming, but California's got a lot of farming too. And it's got a lot of manufacturing, and there's still manufacturing operations because the land is cheap. Yeah. And most of the land in Northern California is just pure knowledge economy. Right. All the Intel factories are gone from Santa Clara County. There used to be huge factories in Santa Clara County. People don't remember that. Yeah. I mean, there used to be a time like that.
Before we jump into the topic too, this is a great introduction. I'm guessing too, isn't it a more business friendly environment, Jack, compared to most others?
It tends to be sort of like you don't get as much red tape. Although I have to tell you, forming a corporation here takes longer than it should, in my opinion. And Delaware is one of the fastest, and California is pretty fast too. People don't understand. They think forming a corporation is just a huge deal. Obviously, it can be, but the filing system is really in the nature of a database. And the database is going to assign you a number. Okay. And the number represents your file number that says you've paid your fee and you've filed adequate paperwork to have an entity. And the entity is a fiction, as we know. The entity, it's not like a bus that drives into your driveway and now you've got a corporation. It's a bus. I mean, you can put a bus in a corporation. You can put all your assets in a corporation. Corporation is like a mythical person that comes to life upon the filing. I tell you, Florida takes a long time to process an electronic filing. I don't know what they're doing wrong. I don't know if it's just too many people filing. But to me, that I've been surprised at how slow it is compared to other places, and just being objective about it. And I've been through, and I've told you this as a joke, to become a member of the bar here in Florida, it is a major obstacle course. I mean, they ask you 1 million questions. If you look at the application form, you're going to have to go back 40 years and talk about, did you get a traffic ticket when you were in high school? Like literally, Joe, if you see this, I must have spent 100 hours of time filling out this form, revising it, getting the backup for it, getting the documentation. And they want to know everything. I mean, they want to know, well, you're a member of the bar in Hawaii too. When did you do that? Why did you do that? Do you practice in Hawaii? Like 1 million questions. I mean, you would think I was being appointed to the Supreme Court or something. I mean,
well, that's the next step for you to be appointed to the Supreme Court.
Well, I actually think the federal process of appointments to the federal bench are less strict than getting to take and sit for the Florida bar exam.
Wow, boy.
You have to do all this stuff before you sit. if you don't do this stuff, they don't let you sit, and they set deadline dates. And
Wow.
so it's quite an ordeal. It's bad enough to have to study, these topics that you haven't touched for 40 years. You have to go back and talk about criminal law, criminal procedure, all this stuff that's not part of a civil practice. But yeah, I'd say that's a little overdone, in my opinion.
Well, that's why you're moving to Florida. So Florida's got to be onto the topics here. So the best places to retire, my guess is Florida one of those top 10, or tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the way people are trying to pick these choices, they're looking at those three factors, which is what's the tax neutrality, what's the climate like, and then kind of what's the overall community and sort of overall cost of living. Like even gasoline, I think, is about half the price of what it is in California, which kind of shocks me as well. And I think when you look at these different companies that do these surveys, they're all trying to sort of say in a way that's different than, say, the founding fathers of the United States would say it. Look, there's actually 50 different sovereignties. There's 50 different states are like their own little sovereignties. Like the governor Newsom is in charge of that sovereignty called California. The governor DeSantis is in charge of that sovereignty called Florida. Those sovereignties represent choices about what quality of life you could get. And if you don't like the quality of life in any of those sovereignties, go try a different sovereignty. Go try a different state. Now, people are like, oh, what's the difference? It's still McDonald's and Starbucks. And yeah, there's a lot of those national brands, but every sovereignty has its own little quirks, including like taking a bar exam and applying for a bar exam and getting a license. And for example, here in Florida, you're entitled to get a concealed carry permit as a right.
Really?
Like they don't go through and say, no, we don't want to give you a permit. They're like, you took a course on how to shoot a gun, we'll give you a permit. We're going to take your fingerprints and you're going to get a card that says you're concealed carry. If you want to concealed carry, I think probably half of the people in Florida are concealed carry. I think their view of life is, hey, if someone's going to get in my way and be stubborn, I'm going to have some firepower to use against them. And I don't think there's any greater number of murders here as a result, but who knows? I don't know. There's a big case that's coming up in the U.S. Supreme Court about concealed carry and how it works. But generally speaking, getting back to the topic of how do you choose, or what do you think about choosing, or how does one think about it?
Right.
We have a big array of politics in these different sovereigns in the United States, and the politics here are certainly very different than the politics elsewhere. And of course, within each state, there are cities that are very different, right? And you could argue that one of the things people do over time is they try to figure out, well, where do I want to live for the last 20, 30 years of my life, if that's what retirement is. My parents did that and moved from New York. And if you talk to them about moving from New York, their biggest argument was New York's too expensive and it's too cold. And why are we paying taxes for children that we no longer have here? Why are we paying all the, and people feel like they're getting taken advantage of if their kids aren't in school and they're paying all these taxes. They start saying to themselves, I don't want to do that anymore. And that's what my mom and dad did. So, if you go to like this question of what are the 10 friendliest cities, and we went through kind of that look, I'll just recite what they're saying. And they did it in order. They said number 10 was Asheville, North Carolina. I'll put this up on the screen just so if you do the video, people can see it. This is off of something that I sent you and said, yeah, this is sort of like what people are going to be looking at more and more as they get older. Where do you want to be? Asheville, North Carolina is probably one of those small towns like Palo Alto, California, that very few people realize represents a place of great creativity. They say it has lots of studios and galleries and music and whatnot. They don't really say there's any jobs here. They more or less are saying, look, if you're going to retire and you got a retirement income, come to Asheville, North Carolina. Now, North Carolina has taxes, so Tennessee has no taxes. So the other one is Chattanooga, Tennessee, number 9, one of the friendliest cities in the South. Notice that these are all cities that are in the South, right? These are all not heavily populated cities yet. So it's kind of like a statement that you can work anywhere and eventually retire anywhere.
I'm wondering, I know you've traveled. I traveled a lot throughout the United States, and I used to travel more in my previous life, as you know, in the airline industry for 16 years. And it was more than a coincidence, I think. And I wonder if there's a theme here, Jack, still to this day, that there was always this joke that, the Southern people were a lot more hospitable. We'd go there and, you wouldn't know people, and you'd walk in and they'd invite you to dinner and say, come here. I mean, it is interesting. You don't get that in California, for instance, do you? I mean, I wonder if you think there's still a lot to this, the kind of the Southern charm, so to speak, or whatever that is.
Yeah, I think that there's a greater degree of friendliness generally, and less busyness. I guess, the one thing I think is true about Northern California is everyone's trying to optimize the last bit of time. Like everything is, it's hard to get someone that's not doing 3 things at the same time. Like even me, riding my bike, listening to a book, reading text messages. I mean, think about it. These AR glasses are just designed to play right into the same thing, which is do more, do more, do more, do more, do more. And I think the one thing that happens in the South, generally, North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, is, hey, life is too short. You don't have to kill yourself. It's not like you need to make so much money because you're in a high overhead environment. You can buy a house for $200,000 and really live a decent life. You don't have to have a killer mortgage. I don't think you can get a house anymore in Northern California for less than $2 million that isn't some sort of dump, right?
I don't think so. It's pretty rare. It's sad, but it's the truth. Yeah.
$2 million used to be a lot of house years ago. I mean, a lot. I mean, really a lot of house. I mean, I think of New York, and I think of when I grew up in Brooklyn, $2 million was like a mansion. People would have mansions. They would talk about a multi-million-dollar house. In California, it's like a cottage.
Yeah.
So cottage.
What else do we have? So number 9's Chattanooga.
Chattanooga, then Santa Fe, New Mexico, which has been on the charts for a while, but I think it's become an artsy town.
Right.
I think the weather there is a little more dramatic than people want to admit. They get snow. There are seasons. They actually have some slopes there. I have some friends. It's a decent, easy Southwest flight. I have friends that have second residences in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's kind of like a alternative universe. They say, and the one thing that's true, New Mexico is on the border of Mexico. And it has a fair amount of crime. Now, a lot of people don't factor that in, but I have to tell you, I think that's becoming more and more a factor too, as you have more haves and have-nots, and the have-nots don't mind kind of engaging in crime. And that's the one thing I saw in Northern California that I don't see here in Florida, which is I can't tell you how many bikes of mine have been stolen, some right in front of my own house and right in front of my own office, locked in front of my own office. I leave a bike here unlocked and no one touches it. I mean, it's just a complete difference. I mean, to me, that stuff eventually gets to you when you have to lock everything and bolt it shut and do stuff like that. I remember when I left New York thinking New York is becoming too dangerous from that point of view.
So I don't know. As you go through this, Norfolk Virginia is number 7. What is the homeless situation like in Florida? How different it is in some of these states like California and Oregon and some of these others that are really just seem to be out of control?
You don't see people on the street the way you see them on El Camino. right in front of the Stanford Shopping Center,
Right,
a bunch
right.
of them. I mean, it's shocking to me. They have the signs up. You just don't see that here. I haven't seen that here. Now, what you do see is you do see people who are working, picking up garbage, mowing the lawn, doing stuff, doing manual labor on the streets. But you don't see people just like, camping out. You don't see tents. You don't see tent cities as you have them in San Francisco.
Oh, you wonder why, and again, I don't want to get off topic here, but
Yeah.
we're talking about the friendliest places, the most, friendliest retirement, friendliest place to live. So why wouldn't a place like Florida be a hotbed for homeless because of the weather, for instance?
I don't know the answer to that, Joe. I have to tell you, I just don't see it. I mean, there are places, like there are inner city places where there are more people that might be called homeless. Although to me, the ones I see, they typically have a bicycle and they're riding around with all their stuff. They're not actually kind of camping out.
Right.
So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, it's a good question, because I do think, for example, New York City has a lot of homeless, but occasionally they do kind of sweeps and move people into some sort of shelters and do something to clean up. I think they're working on kind of cleaning up the city now, because they kind of expect a new cycle of what might be called the fall seminars and fall conferences and that sort of thing, if it happens. But I don't know the answer to that, because I tell you, the place I was shocked in, I was in court in San Diego. I can't believe how many people are homeless in San Diego. I mean, just over the top. Like,
there's a lot in San Diego too.
Just hanging out on the lawn of the courthouse, like not obviously homeless, obviously haven't bathed for quite a while, obviously just carrying all their belongings. And San Diego, to me, is like probably even worse than San Francisco. And San Francisco is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Your point about the weather would kind of suggest that Florida would be a refuge, but I haven't seen it. Now, maybe I haven't gone to certain places, or maybe I've missed it, but I just haven't seen it, not at the level I see it in San Francisco and San Diego.
All right.
So that's a factor too. That's a factor too. So Norfolk, Virginia is on the list. It's been on the list for a while. I think one of the benefits is it has a relatively fast way to get to DC, and DC is obviously a national hub, right? So people like that. So Jackson, Wyoming, and I want to say something about Wyoming, because Wyoming is a tax-free state, and Wyoming only has 500,000 total citizens.
Really?
In that, it's got the relatively smallest population for the number of square miles of space. And of course, it's a big ski area, and you could still buy a lot of land in Wyoming if you want your privacy. You could get thousands of acres if you want to buy it. Obviously, you can't do much with it, but if you really want to have a big estate, and there are people that are doing that. There are people that are believing that the future is dangerous in cities for all the homeless and crime reasons that are recited, and getting a big estate that you can put a lot of barbed wire fence around, and you can be like miles and miles hidden from any road, is sort of what some people are doing. And there's literally moving to big tracts of land off grid on the view that they don't want to be near other people. Now, that's not my style, but there are definitely people who are doing it. Jackson, of course, is close to the Jackson Hole Resort, which has become quite a big ski area and a she kind of place. So things are far more expensive there. But, that to me will be someplace that will grow bigger, as will other places like Virginia, because Virginia is so close to DC, and DC, of course, got a huge job market, right? There's federal government's just mega huge and is always hiring people. So I don't know that Virginia would be a place I would choose.
There's Savannah.
Georgia's been on the list for a while. I think it's kind of overpopulated, but I think people would say there's still less density than what you'd see. I'd be interested in plotting how housing has gone up over time in each of these top 10 cities, right? because to some degree, when stuff like this gets published and people think, hey, we're going to retire, let's start visiting these places, usually they have to have somebody else that tells them it's a good place to be in. They don't just go off a magazine ad. They usually have to have, a parent or a sister or brother or some family member they trust. Says, yeah, I've been here for a few years. It's pretty decent. Here's the good, here's the bad, here's the ugly.
Right.
And usually there's some of all that. So there's just three more we can quickly go through. So Key West, Florida.
Interesting.
I think that's just recently on the list. There's other places in Florida that have been on the list. Part of it is Miami's too expensive.
Right.
Miami's a little bit like San Francisco.
Right.
It's become dense. It's become overpopulated. It's got all the issues that San Francisco has. So you look at these places that are maybe an hour or two away.
Right.
And people start saying, well, what about Key West? Or what about this? Or what about that? And I think you're going to see more of that, where it's not the actual big city anymore. It's more like, how do you get an hour or two away?
Right.
But sort of close enough that if you want to go visit, it's not going to take you forever to get there.
Yeah, it's a nice place.
Maybe there's even a fast, sort of a fast train. So then there's Charleston, South Carolina. I guess they put down as number one Greenville, South Carolina. South Carolina usually doesn't make the list, but it's made the list probably because people are recognizing that the cost is lower.
You're right. Right.
Look at it. They're not yet on the radar, right? They're sort of like only now coming on the radar, right?
Right.
So people are sort of starting to say, if you can work anywhere, why not pick a place that has low or zero taxes, good climate, and value? Value for your dollar, because if you're retiring, you probably don't really want to spend a lot of dollars on real estate. You're probably going to travel a lot too. So think of it that way too, which is how much time are you actually spending?
Right.
If you're traveling, like when you were working for Delta, you were probably traveling 100 to 200 days a year because you had free tickets. You could jump on a flight, right? You could set yourself up and you probably get on first class, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a big benefit for people that work for the airline.
It's interesting. Quite a few places in the South, which, interesting, especially when the mix between, retirement and friendly. And I think I still wonder, this will be an interesting exercise over the next couple of years, or at least to find out if a lot of this relocation, I still wonder in the back of my mind, whether a lot of this is very reactionary or people actually put into some thought and they're just like, I'm fed up, I'm tired. I mean, I just to share a quick story, I had a really good friend of mine that decided to move to Texas, and he just retired from Deloitte as a partner. So did very well for himself and his family, and he could live anywhere. They could live anywhere. And, they chose Texas for a couple of reasons, but he was explaining to me, and I won't give the details about the cost of the savings just in state tax. And it was substantial, but then I did ask him, I said, well, do you know that the real estate taxes are more? And do you know that your heating and air conditioning is different there? And so, and I'm sure there's exercises that people do along the way, but I guess my point is, I also think there's something that you can't quantify for some people, and that's the political environment.
Yeah, politics, if the politics are wrong, and you feel like it's constantly in your face, obviously that can grate on people. And I think that generally speaking, most people in Florida are open-minded, although they tilt to the right. Most people in California are open-minded, Northern California, but they tilt to the left.
Right.
Like you hear things here in Florida, like, why are we talking about universal minimum income? Shouldn't people have to work? Like, why give money away? Like this whole Andrew Yang thing.
Yeah, right.
Of course, Andrew Yang is professing about a world where there's a lot of robots and a lot of other, machines doing the work and really displacing workers. Like I was thinking today, I don't know why this thought occurred to me. When's the last time you ever saw anyone operate an elevator? Remember years ago, there was an elevator operator. Do you remember that?
I do. And not the same, similar, but when's the last time you saw someone pump the gas for you and wash your windows when you pull in?
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you look at it, elevator operators essentially went out of business because of automation.
Interesting.
Because of software and computers and mechanical robots, which you could argue an elevator is, where you press a button and it takes you to the floor. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. But I remember as a kid, my mom taking me to Macy's or whatever the store was in New York City, and there was an elevator operator running the elevator. And that was a job. Yeah. That was an actual job. It's like, well, what about the telegraph operator? Well, there's no telegraph anymore. What about the phone operator? There's really no phone operator anymore. And, if you look at some of this automation, that's really interesting to observe. They're trying to imagine that older people like my mom, who now needs full-time care, now needs life support and full-time care at a hospital. Can you imagine how many Medicare dollars are going out the door on her at this point, and multiply that by, many, many numbers of people like her. But they're talking about, well, there'll be a robot. And you know what they're discovering? That when they test these robots, there's a button that says, support. Yeah. The older person keeps pressing the support button to get on the speakerphone someone to talk to because they're lonely. I'm serious, Joe. That's what they're discovering. They're discovering that the human touch is such a critical part of our beings that the button that succeeds and gets pressed the most is not the one that says, go get me a martini and whatever's on there. Of course, it's on your cell phone now, but there's a button that says call support. And then someone's got to get on the phone and walk the person through whatever it is that they're upset about, which is, probably not even involving the robot. Like there's stories like this that have appeared on 60 Minutes. I remember years ago that one of the consequences of giving away free medical support, and they were using the example of either Denmark or Sweden or one of the Norwegian countries, is people call doctors when they're lonely. They just say, well, I have no one else to turn to because they don't have a church community or they don't have a yoga community. They don't have other people that they could talk to. So they go to the doctors, and they go to the doctor's office just to have a chat. Yeah. Well, how you feeling? Well, I feel lonely. Well, but are you eating? Yeah. Is everything okay otherwise? Sort of. I just feel depressed and lonely. And so they're finding that as people get older, particularly when a spouse has died and the kids have left the house and maybe they're not living in a community of any real type, they're sort of relying on these other resources. Yeah. And so to me, that's the one thing that's not covered in that group of 10, which is how quickly can you gain a new network. Right. Like here, for example, there is actually a venture capital community here. There's actually even the beginning of an angel community here. It's not as sophisticated as Silicon Valley by any stretch, and it's not as risk taking. It's much more risk adverse than Silicon Valley. But there is the beginning of incubation of companies and startup activities and VCs and angel investors, because they're recognizing that the future is not the past. Right. And it is creativity that is going to produce the next innovation, just like you produced Bundle Select and you came up with the idea and you promoted it. That's new. Yeah. That's something that came out of your brain. That's not something that just landed from Mars. Right. And so incubating these ideas and getting them to be supported and getting them to the next stage, they're recognizing that. And the interesting question across those 10 cities is I bet those 10 cities generally are much less oriented in that direction. They're probably much more retirement cities than they are cities that support what might be called, workers or knowledge workers. Yeah, I would say so. Well, before we wrap things up, remind
our listeners again how they could reach you. And even though you're in Florida, I know you're practicing and you're as busy as ever. And we'll hope to see you back out in California next week or so, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I do more hours now. It's sort of funny. I work more hours now than I've been working at any time in the future. It's like, or any time in the past. It's like I get up pretty early, as I told you, just to get the 3 hours in.
Right.
So yeah, we're a computer law group. We're a national law firm. I should put on the screen, because someone told me, it was interesting criticism, and I'll share it with you.
Okay.
He said, why are you wasting all that real estate with that banner that says COVID, open, ready to help, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, there are people that think you're closed. He says, man, that's valuable real estate, man. What are you doing? That says open and ready to help. Of course you're open and ready to help. Your website opened up. I said, no, people think this COVID stuff really is closed things. He's like, get rid of that. He's like, get rid of that, like, and then the second thing he said is, he said, and I do agree with this, and I have to say, I am going to change the website. He said, you don't want to put on the first page of the website, pay online. The message is that you're all about money then. All you're doing is asking for money. He said, free consultation, that's good. You should put above free money, like free time, free money.
That's funny.
He was funny, but you know what? He was telling the truth. He was like, he was roasting the site. He said, oh, the phone number is good. You still have a phone number. That's good. Why isn't the email address? Why isn't, send us an email at info or request or something? Like, he was doing the right thing. And then, of course, he did things that were embarrassing, like, well, do your links work? And, the links sometimes break because people don't organize stuff correctly. So he said, all right, let me check your oh, the podcast link works. He was like shocked that it works. He says, wow, you got a podcast link. That's good. And first, of course, the first podcast was the one I did with you. That says the Valley Current Stars with Cucchiara. So thank you for doing that. But then he said, well, I clicked something else and it didn't work.
Oh.
And he said, of course, anytime you force someone to click, even contact us, they think that that's like goofy, that you should just have everything on the first page. But I don't know how you have everything on the first page.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, you got to get someone to reorganize the site. That's for sure. It is interesting. There's a whole dynamic to that. I got involved with more of that with Bundle Select more than ever, getting the right people kind of for layout and design and aesthetics and all that kind of stuff. There is a lot to that. Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot to it, and you could spend a lot of time and a lot of dollars on it.
Yeah.
And I have to say, we probably do the least amount of advertising of any law firm, and I'm not proud of that, but in some ways we worry that when we advertise, we sort of attract too many crazies, like I can't show you the number of handwritten letters we've gotten from people in jail that said, hey, you're an appellate specialist in California. Can you help me get out of jail? Can you get my case in front of the Court of Appeal? I mean, I have examples of them. I'm definitely going to start framing some of these letters. They're all so entertaining. They're all handwritten, from, some Alcatraz or something. It's always some prison somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it's good to catch up, and this is a great topic. We'll have to do another one in a week or so, but maybe we'll see you in California. And
we'll go out. I'll take you out to lunch. Maybe we can go to 𝗥𝗱𝗡𝗡 if it's reopened. I hope it has. 𝗥𝗱𝗡𝗡's got like the greatest, like the best Greek restaurant in Northern California.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, all the best to you, Jack. Thanks, and I wish you the best with your mom too. I know she's in a tough spot right now. So
well, we can't take our lives for granted. And let me tell you, 90, as I showed you the pictures, that she says to me, those 70 years flew.
Wow.
She was a 20-year-old bride, and 71 years later, she's essentially survived her husband and survived her youngest son. I mean, she's essentially the sort of last vestige of the Martino. Her main name is Martino. She's like one of the last remaining living results of the Martino clan. And, she's fighting her way for another year. I have to give her credit. She's a fighter. But, at some point, you recognize life does come to an end. And you just have to recognize that when the when it comes to an end, you just have to accept it. You can't expect a million surgeries. I don't know that it really extends your life.
No, I think you're right. But I think the other thing that I'll say, because I know you don't, but it makes me think and realize that, for a person who is a very successful attorney and out in the Bay Area, and the practice that you grew and the reputation you have, most people probably don't know this. So I'll remind them that, Jack picked up everything and basically moved to Florida to take care of his brother and his mom. And you're kind of the epitome of the entrepreneur when you think about it. You have this thriving business in California and you're licensed in all these other states. And then you pick up your life because you want to take care of your mom and your brother. And now here you are building a business in Florida.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like my brother was supposed to get better, and I thought I was only going to be here temporarily, and then he goes and dies, and then my mom is completely flummoxed by what played out, and so the life takes interesting twists and turns, and you got to kind of roll with the punches. And we actually bought an office building for setting up our Florida practice because it's so relatively cheap. We got like a $10 million office building for like $1 million, maybe a couple million.
You could probably sell your office building in Palo Alto and buy a city in Florida.
Well, I have to say that one thing you cherish about that office building in Palo Alto is it's got a lot of nostalgia.
It does.
And the location can't be beat. So I get offers for it all the time that I have to decline. But in general, I would say, from a square footage point of view, you can get a lot more in Florida with a lot more land.
Right.
And just a lot more of everything.
Right.
But then it's not Palo Alto, it's not Stanford University.
That's very true.
Basically the story. I mean, it's location, location, location.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, Jack. Nice catching up, and hopefully we get a chance to see you next week.
Yeah, I'll send you a note and we'll set something up. I'll see whether 𝗟𝗡𝗑𝗓 can take us at some point.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Take care of yourself.
Yeah. All right.
𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗧 with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for Jack Russo joining us. For more information, you could always go to 𝗟𝗡𝗩𝗘.com. That is 𝗟𝗡𝗩𝗘.com. Take care.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit 𝗟𝗡𝗩𝗘.com. That's 𝗟𝗡𝗩𝗘.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at 𝗟𝗡𝗩𝗘.com.